Hi, everyone. I'm Mary Beth McAndrews from Dread Central, and I'm here today with Micheline Pitt and R.H. Norman, the writers and directors of the incredible short Grummy that just came out this month. Well, not this month, in December of 2021. And I'm so excited to chat with you guys about this incredible short that you guys have created.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. We're super excited to be here. We're big friends of Dread, so it's always awesome to be with you guys.
Yeah. So, okay, my first question for you, because this is a difficult movie, it deals with pretty difficult and heavy subject matter in a really fascinating, dark, and fantastical way. And Micheline, I was just curious, like, what inspired you to finally kind of take your experiences and make them into a film?
Well, I mean, to be completely honest, I had a lot of childhood trauma, and a bunch of repressed memories came back in my early 30s, and ended up, unfortunately, like being in the hospital and dealing with all of that. And it was tough. I mean, anybody that has this sort of trauma can attest to the difficulty of dealing with it. And luckily, I had someone like my husband by my side, later in life, and was able to kind of process everything. And I started journaling and writing about my childhood and my experience and my feelings. And I felt that was really therapeutic and helpful. And I told him that I started writing the story about my childhood, and came up with this idea of Grummy, kind of based on my imaginary friend and like my experience as a child and what kind of got me through everything. And honestly, how Grummy happened really came up with him, coming to me and said, let's make this into a short. I think you should do this. This is really important. And it honestly, like, I wouldn't have believed in myself enough to ever tell my story if it wasn't for his support.
And so what was it like for the two of you to work on this story together? I know it's, as someone who has trauma, like talking to my partner about trauma, it's always a very interesting dynamic. So what was that like working together on such an intense story?
Oh, I mean, it was, an honor and a privilege for me. My wife is one of my heroes. Like, she really put herself out there and really mined a lot of pain to try to make a story that showed how she personally survived it, and hopes of encouraging other people to, at least at a minimum, feel less alone, and also potentially, feeling bold enough to talk about themselves. So from the beginning, I thought it was an important story, and I thought that she had a really interesting, take on it, because there's a lot of reasons to love genre, there's a lot of reasons to love fantasy, horror, all these different things, but a lot of times we don't really talk about why those things are that important. And I've always kind of been resistant to the idea of escapism being kind of a light thing, right? Being something that is just a fun frivolity. It's not. Like, for Micheline, and this is what she kind of talked to me, and this is why I felt like Grummy would be an important story to work on together, is that, if she didn't have those monsters, if she didn't have the ability to create worlds and do her drawings and make her art and really get lost in, the world of fantasy, she might not be here. And that, I think, is true of thousands, if not millions of people. And so for me, it was like, well, I can help you tell your story to the best of my ability. And she's been very brave in coming forward with it.
And I think that having a partner, both creatively and also in marriage, has been great. That is so supportive. I feel very lucky to have someone who's like very tender and understanding, and has been able to like kind of deal with like days that were tough. I mean, there was a day on set when we had Violet's performance, when she's crying at the end of the film and there's like snot coming out of her nose. Like, none of that is like fake tears. That's all that little 8-year-old girl's performance. That's one take. And I couldn't handle, like, working with her through that scene. I worked with her on a bunch of other scenes, and I had to have him kind of take over, because I was like literally watching the monitor, like sobbing and trying not to make a noise, because it was really like triggering for my memories, to watch that sequence. And we also tried to, make this film watchable for someone who might have had trauma, where they wouldn't be able to not watch it and feel something but without being, having a negative triggering experience. Because I've watched so many things about this kind of sensitive subject matter, and it's just like, from a a mindset of someone who's never gone through it, where it's like about shock rather than telling a story that has importance. And I always feel like the less that you show is the better. But I felt like her performance and like what she says is all the stuff I said when I was a little girl, you know, and it was just all, it was really tough. So having him there and helping through that scene was like really amazing. So I felt very supported the entire time dealing with this, not just with him, but our entire crew was just, you know, like so many people in the crew were like amazing for us to work with, because we had a lot of people that were survivors of different childhood trauma and that believed in this project, and people that were parents that believed in this project. So it meant something to a lot of people that were a part of it.
That's incredible. That's so good. And so, you know, you mentioned Violet's incredible performance, and I don't understand how she is like so talented at 8 years old. And like the ending, I was crying. I was like, I can't, this is so much but in an incredible way. And what was it like working with her on this film and like getting her to kind of tap into those emotions?
One of those things you always wonder, you're like, why does like Tim Burton always work with like Johnny Depp? Or like, why does this director always work with said actor? Like when you work with the McGraw family, and we mean this, they have like 4 kids that are incredible actors that we've only worked professionally with. We've gotten to know their family incredibly well. She has 2 of the best parents you could ever hope for, Jackie and Colin McGraw. Like they're not only wonderful parents who have children that have real lives, real imaginations, are real children. They're not just, you know, like puppets to perform. Like, you know, you hear horror stories about childhood actors and stuff in the past. They're incredible. And Violet is just this incredible little powerhouse. It's like if you imagine like Wednesday Addams mixed together with like a Disney character. Like she's just this kind of interesting fantasy driven child with a huge imagination, who's also kind of weird too, like in the most charming way, because she was so excited on Haunting of Hill House. Like
she's a morbid kid.
She's a morbid kid.
She's a morbid kid.
Like she talks about the bent neck lady, and she took a selfie with her because she wanted to, and it became like a crazy internet meme.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Has the most amazing little personality, and she's so inquisitive and just interesting, and has these big ideas and imagination. I mean, honestly, she's a dream. Like we would hope to get to work with them on everything that we ever do in the future.
Violet so the other thing that a lot of people don't necessarily think about when you're doing films, and why Grummy was such a big risk, like creatively and logistically and all that. Labor laws are such that children have a very, very limited amount of time on set.
And when you're 8.
And I think my DP, Sean McDaniel, and I, you know, I think I've worked with him on everything I've ever done. He's a friend from college. And I think we timed exactly how much one day she was allowed to be in front of the camera. And I think it was about 2 hours. And
in between breaks, school, everything.
Always when we had the camera running, how much we did. And what that meant is that we had 1 or 2 takes per scene with Violet. And she just nailed everything right away.
We prepped beforehand. We had practice stuff we did with her as well. But yeah, that performance, like when she's crying, all of that's all her, you know, and she's just incredible. And she's 8 when she did this. So who knows where this girl is going to be.
She's got a very bright future ahead of her.
Oh yeah. Like Natalie Portman, Oscar, like that's where I see her going when she's older, for sure.
Oh, for sure. It's like the way that she cried at the end. I'm like, I don't understand how you were able to tap into those emotions like that as an 8-year-old. It's incredible.
She has a really amazing story, because I asked her exactly how you think. You're like, how does an 8-year-old perform like this? They've barely experienced life. Like, and she's had a wonderful childhood. She doesn't have trauma like what happens in the character of the story. When she was really little, she was born, she got a purple bunny rabbit named Ruby that she had since she was an infant, and she carries her with her everywhere, every show, every movie, every commercial, anything she does, she comes with her. She accidentally left her on a plane ride and lost her. And that's what she thinks of every single time she breaks down, is Ruby. And her mom like did this huge post all over her social media trying to find Ruby, and some woman somewhere had the same exact stuffed animal and sent her a handwritten note and says, this is Ruby too, and she's going to come live with you now. And now the purple bunny that she takes with her everywhere on set and she uses to wipe all of her tears off of her face for every scene is now Ruby too.
Yeah. She also drew from a pretty sad experience when she's comforting Grummy near the end of the movie. You know, her mom reminded her, it's like, you know, they had a family dog who was dying, and Violet would comfort the dog, and so she drew
When she
from
was
that.
6.
Yeah, so it's really sad. Violet's a very unique little, you know, creature.
We're big fans. She's amazing.
That's well, because like stuffed animals for kids are so important. Like obviously for you and for me. Like I still have
still have stuffed animals.
So do
like.
Well, obviously I have so many.
We're in a hotel room. Otherwise, I would be pulling out my collection of stuffed animals to show you. Yeah.
And like I have a baby doll that I got for my first Christmas that sits in my office. Like I still have her. And like if I lost her, it'd be a nightmare. And I would like love
her name.
What?
What's her name?
Baby. I'm very original.
That's a good name.
Baby. I will never put her in clothes. She's covered in water stains from all of the places she's been. Her eyes don't work, and I love her to pieces. She is
She looks haunted at this point.
My fiance is a little bit scared of her, and like everyone sees her and they're like, that's kind of creepy. I'm like, leave Baby alone. I don't want to hear you about me.
In the corner.
No, put her in a glass case. So
like a sign and a lock, and you'll like make everyone afraid of her.
It's like Annabelle. like Annabelle. Exactly. But that kind of leads me to asking about how you came up with the design for Grummy, because I think, Micheline, you posted on your Instagram two of the stuffed animals that you loved as kids.
Yes.
And so I was just curious, like, and I kind of saw some Grummy. I saw like where kind of Grummy might have come from, but I'd love to hear more about how you came up with the design, both for stuffed Grummy and then big Grummy, big monster Grummy.
Absolutely. So the two toys that like were my best friends when I was a kid was My Pet Monster, which so many of us had, and my nickname for him was Pickle Nose, and that's what I called him. Like, and then I had this thing called Brush of Love. So these are my two friends that like I went with me everywhere. It was like both of them, if I could take them, they're huge stuffed animals. Like My Pet Monster is gigantic, and I would just drag Brush of Love with like her tail, and she'd get so tattered, and they would come with me everywhere. But like the My Pet Monster was like my big protector, and she was kind of like my fun best friend, and I was an only child, so you know, toys are super important to me. My imagination was pretty much like all I had. And when I was thinking about this project, it's like, clearly I can't use this IP because it belongs to whatever company that, you know, started this toy. So this would be a great opportunity to design something that has kind of like an 80s nostalgia toy vibe, but it's its own unique thing. So I kind of pulled from like everything from like Popples to Brush of Love to My Pet Monster to my own kind of design. And I just sketched up in my little notebook where I was keeping all of my notes, like this little rough sketch and different sketches of like toy Grummies and then like big monster Grummies. Like I just have tons of sketches that no one's seen of what he could look like. And, you know, because Jim Henson was such a big, you know, idol of mine growing up and like hero, I feel like there's a lot of that in this too. So we really wanted to capture the kind of like 80s nostalgia of like practical magic. So when we did the big monster Grummy, I wasn't able to keep his tail design because of just like budgetary restraints and practical, you know, like practically we could have done it. There just wasn't any money to do it. So I wish he had a tail like the toy because it would have been cute. But, you know, he pretty much is just a bigger realistic version of like the plush toy. There wasn't any huge major design changes, the same color palette, same basic structure. But when you're doing like a soft plush toy, and I also handmade that toy, like I made the pattern with my girlfriend and hand sewed, hand dyed, did everything on that toy. And then I hand sculpted like the horns and some elements and then passed it off to the practical effects team to make like nicer versions in resin, and showed them pictures and everything of like, hey, this is what I think this should look like. And then they did it, and then we just sewed it on and attached it to the toy. But yeah, it was just, you know, coming up with the color palettes and things based on my own childhood and experience, and then just kind of my own drawing style. And then, yeah, the team just showed us like the final concept design of what Big Grummy was going to look like, you know, not knowing if they were going to kind of go in a different direction or stay with like the, you know, concept stuff that I gave them in color palettes. And I think that it looks really nice. I think everybody did a great job.
I just want to give Grummy a big hug. He looks like a big friend that you just want to bury your face in the
Oh, yeah.
fur, like exactly like a Jim Henson thing, like I thought I was thinking about Labyrinth and the Dark Crystal, and just being like, just want to bury your face in him and love him. He's so
I know.
That
sweet.
was another kind of conflict we had about it too, is like, okay, so there's so many big furry monsters, right?
Right.
It's almost like
Yeah.
it's definitely an archetype at this point. And what we learned when we were going through this is that my first instinct at least was like, okay, we need something no one's ever seen before. It's got to be completely different and weird and wild. It's an archetype for a reason. You know, the big purple, blue, red monster, it invites you in there. You want to hug it. It has very simple facial features that relate to people. And we found that was there for a reason. And that definitely made us want to keep it kind of simple and reflect towards what people grew up loving and what they feel is inviting.
Yeah, like I feel like, like Sully from, Monsters Inc. is familiar because he's the same colors and spots and color palettes and everything as the monster from Little Monsters. So if you rewatch that movie, that character is just Sully. It's the same colors, it's the same purple spots, it's the same horns, it's almost the same story with a much different twist because it's been Pixar'd. But it's just interesting. I feel like whenever you look at something, there's always familiarity based on something previous for some reason, because that nostalgia kind of is what people connect to.
It's what they connect to. And the important part of designing Grummy was making a creature that people could connect to, not necessarily
Like
making something novel.
If you were 80s and a 90s baby, like you would feel like you would have had this toy.
Definitely. And so where did you come up with the name Grummy?
I honestly just came up with it randomly. I was like, if because I looked at the design and I'm like, I feel like he would grumble. Like he wouldn't really like talk like normal, like all the, like Ludo sounds a certain way. And then you have like, Sully and all these other big monster types. They all have a range of like vocals and speaking. I always thought like he's an underbite. So I feel like you kind of grumble. And I'm like, okay, what can I create a word from that type of speaking? And that's how I came up with Grummy. It was based on how I thought his speech would sound and what I would think a little girl would name something. We kind of like a fake word.
Yeah, I love that. And then I would love to hear more about how you did the set design for her bedroom that looks like gothic and like a fairy tale, but also like a little girl's room. And I'm just curious to hear about like what it was like to construct that set. It's incredible.
Well, I mean, we got really lucky that Doug Williams, who's a really well-known production designer and art department art director in feature films, he donated, his time.
He's been a concept artist on a lot of really big films. I know he did Pacific Rim. He works a lot with. He did Chappie. He's does a lot, and I think that he was interested in the idea of being able to do something that was like very fantasy driven.
He hadn't gotten to be like a full production designer yet, so this was a chance for him to kind of flex his muscles instead of just being in like kind of art department.
Yeah, so he does concept art, So he did an amazing job, and he worked with Nicole Balzerini, who was also his co-production designer to, really build everything out. But Micheline actually dressed everything. You can tell him a little bit more about.
Yeah, I mean, because Doug doesn't live here; he's in Canada. So Nicole really had to do all the heavy lifting for the production design. Her and her husband Kyle Wilson, who did technically the art director. So they spent a year building the sets in their front yard of their house, and like donated almost all their time for free, which is insane. So like if we owe anybody after this, it's Nicole and her husband Kyle, because honestly they put in the most hours, the most time, the most dedication, the most sacrifices, and they just built all that stuff from like donated pieces, leftover scraps from different shows and movies and things that they were working on. Like she's done 12 Soderbergh movies, and then he's working on Star Trek and various other big TV shows. So like, and then no free time that they had in a year, they built the two sets in their front yard, and we have crazy pictures, and it's insane that they were able to achieve this. And when I was working with them on it, like I really wanted there to be little tiny breadcrumbs of both the fantasy world and the real world together. So in the bedroom, there's wisteria wallpaper on all the walls, which ties in with the wisteria tree, and you'll see a lot of the same colors in both worlds, but the live world is very dead and kind of desaturated, even though there's a lot of vibrancy and color. Like it's very muted because it's kind of a sadder existence where the same colors exist in the fantasy world, but that's where she finds her joy and her happiness. But we didn't have enough staff because this was like so, you know, held together with like shoestring and bubble gum. One team, because we only had what was it, like 2 days, one day,
Close to
one or
2 days.
1 or 2 days to build everything and set it up for shooting. So I had to have the entire team on the fantasy set. I said, guys, I already did a practice run in my driveway of the entire bedroom and set everything up and took pictures of everything. Let me just do the bedroom and then you can come in and check all my work. And so I went and did the entire bedroom side myself while they were doing the fantasy side. So we really just kind of stepped in wherever any department needed something, because we've done so much kind of guerrilla, like everything ourselves, filmmaking, and just work in general, that we just weren't afraid to get our hands dirty. And yeah, a lot of the toys that are in the bedroom are toys from my actual childhood. And then I spent like a year shopping online, going to flea markets and yard sales and estate sales and getting like period correct everything. So like the 1980s Sears bedroom set, the 1980s Sears unicorn bed sheets, that unicorn poster that's on the wall is the same unicorn poster I won at a carnival when I was a little girl. Like just, I really got everything down to specific detail because I really wanted it to feel authentic.
That's so cool. And so what was that like, incorporating pieces of your own childhood into this movie? Like what was that kind of I know you talked about like how hard it was watching Violet cry at the end, but like what was that emotionally for you to put these sets together with these pieces of your childhood?
Well, my childhood bedroom didn't look nearly as cool and as magical as this, with the giant picture window. But I had like that 80s mauve pink paint on the wall, and there's lots of, flowers and things. Um, it definitely was kind of haunting. I think that's the easiest way to describe it. It was kind of haunting to see things that, like, the clothes that she wore were things that I would have worn or wore, like the same sneakers, the same, if I don't know if it was even noticeable in the film, but on her sneakers, she had these things called toe biters that look very similar to Grummy, that we like painted and modified to look more like
Yes.
Grummy. I had those exact ones. So I felt like I was looking at myself and like my room. Yeah, it was definitely a haunting experience. I think that's the easiest way to quantify it, is like it was
Yeah.
very haunting. It definitely was therapeutic and lethargic. And I feel like it was a healing process too. Like I definitely felt like I got to close a chapter on my life after making this film, which honestly helped a lot.
I was going to ask, like, what was it like kind of finishing it and getting it out into the world and like seeing the reception? But like, what is the reception? I read some of the YouTube comments that are absolutely incredible of people talking about how they see themselves in this movie. And so, like, what has the reception been like for the two of you, and seeing those kinds of comments and hearing that feedback from so many people?
I mean, Micheline can give a better answer to this, honestly, because she's the one that people are going to, and for good reason. It's her story. But I know I've seen some of the messages she's been receiving, and I guess the easiest way I could say it is that we're humbled because sometime after released, I started realizing that this, or just being told that this was actually having a deep emotional impact on people. We were being told that watching this and Micheline's courage and coming out with her own story was motivating people to tell their own family, that it was motivating people to go to therapy. We were getting these incredible messages from people, and it's like, what you hope to do is make a piece of art that touches someone, right? And it's like, having made this, it's like, and seeing some of the responses we've been getting that will always remain private and that are just between us and the people who send them, it's just an incredible feeling of like, okay, well, this was a really hard film to make, almost impossible, and it mattered to someone. It touched someone. We've had people tell them this, watching it changed their life, and it's a 10-minute short film. So the reception from just people who watch it and see it has been just truly humbling.
And I think that, one of the things that I feel like this is like the last shoe to drop, we had the Me Too movement make space for sexual abuse, assault survivors that were adults. And I feel like in that world, in that space, there really isn't a place for children. And I wanted this to kind of advocate for children in a way to show that, like, unfortunately, the reality of this, there's over 43 million people living in the United States that have survived this similar type of abuse. And, this isn't something that is just a small percentage, unfortunately. And I think that even if someone didn't deal with the same story as myself or Sarah's character, a lot of people had traumatic experiences as children, even if it was just bullying or um, physical abuse or absentee parent or abandonment. They had their imagination to escape to and find sanctuary there. And I think a lot of people can relate to the fact that our imaginations in many ways saved us as children, and a lot of them still save us today as adults. And I think there's an importance there. I think that if anything that comes out of this, if parents can sit and watch this with their kids and teach them about consent and have conversations, and like maybe someone will disclose to their partner or family member or a friend, or have a conversation, that's amazing. That's what I really hope comes out of this, and more people can bring awareness about the subject matter. I mean, it's 10 minutes short. I wish this could have been a feature. That would have been great to tell a bigger story. But it's a short film, and I feel like it's at least done its purpose with that, and it touched a lot of people's lives, which is awesome. And we feel really humbled and honored to be able to make something that means something to anybody. That's
Yeah.
10 minutes.
I would also say that the other thing that we've been very encouraged by is the response we're getting from producers and studios and different things like that. They just really responded well to this thing. And, we didn't know how that was going to go over, but, we're in a bunch of exciting conversations, as a result of the short. So, reception overall is exactly, what we hope for. It's just been very vulnerable for us. It's been very putting ourselves out here like this. And, especially for Micheline, it's just, it was a scary moment, but, it ended up, better than we could have expected.
Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of subject matters out there that deserve to be handled with like authenticity and tenderness, and with like gentleness, that have not been handled in that way. So it'd be really lovely to see stories that have importance that need to be told and be handled in a way that's like tasteful and important, and aren't going to be shocking and triggering for people that move people. So I think it's cool that people and the studios have responded in a way, they're like, wow, people can actually handle subject matter that we never thought they could in a way that's incredibly tasteful.
And so do you want this to be a feature, or would you like this to be a feature?
I mean, that would be awesome, but it's at the end of the day, I'm happy that I got to tell my story and have the short. And I feel like there's so many more stories out there to tell. And if the day ever came, someone really wanted to do this, that would be a conversation that we would be open to having. But at this point, we're kind of focused on moving forward.
Cool. And then I just have one last question, Micheline. I'm a big fan of movies that deal with these kinds of topics, especially from survivors and from not like one guy who's like, it's so shocking and like, look at this crazy thing, like exploitation. And so what do you think the like from your perspective, and you kind of already talked about this, but just from your perspective, being a survivor and being someone who is working through this trauma, like why do you think that's so important that those movies, like that perspective is heard in these movies and not the kind of usual male perspective we see?
I feel like so rarely women have been allowed to be in that space to tell these kind of stories. When you think about like stuff that deals with sexual assault and abuse, I feel like 90% of the movies are directed and written solely by men. And it's not to say that I don't think a man can tell those stories, because obviously my husband and I worked together on this, and we worked together great with that because he also had a female voice he was working with, I think it helps to have a woman involved in the process. If it's the writer, producer working with them creatively, you need to have women in the room. There need to be a part of projects like this on some level. It doesn't mean it just has to be the director only, but I think it helps to have a female perspective. And now we finally start having them more on sets and departments and different levels. But I think the thing really comes down to is like, everybody was there for shock and not understanding. Like, did any of those directors ever sit down and talk to a sexual abuse victim that was a woman or a man, if it was about a male's perspective of surviving abuse? Have they had conversations with those people? Have they listened to them? Have they talked to them? Do they know what they've gone through? I think that they haven't. And I feel like that shows in their work, because they were more focused on the grotesqueness of something rather than telling a story that has purpose and meaning.
I mean, it's called exploitation for a reason.
Oh, I know.
It's like, and that's to me very gross.
You know, I'm not a big fan of that stuff. You know, if people enjoy it, that's their perspective and their business. But I feel like, you know, I think there's something to be said with something like Alien, for example. Imagine if we saw the xenomorph the entire time. Would that movie have any impact to us? Would we be as scared and as moved and as intrigued? Rosemary's Baby, if you saw the baby, would you be as shocked? Probably not. Like, our imaginations and what we can put together in our own head can be sometimes 10 times more disturbing than what you can show on screen. And it tends to not be as traumatic when you do that. And I think that less is always more with these sort of things. You kind of hint, you lean towards things, and it's not really what you need to show that's going to get the message across. And I feel like a lot of times these stories never focus on the actual victim, and it's always like some revenge thing that's completely unrealistic. It's like most victims never disclose, which means they don't ever get police involved. They never get, and then the percentage of people that actually get sentenced is so low. I mean, it's not an SVU.
It's quite
It's sadly
upsetting.
not an SVU episode, guys.
No.
Reality is not SVU. And that's not authentic. That's not true to what a lot of people's stories are. So I think that focusing on a victim's perspective or survivor's perspective and their experience is where like true storytelling is going to find its place with these kind of stories. And knowing how they feel and what they go through on an emotional and mental level and their relationships and how their lives change. I think that's the interesting story, I think, you know, as a survivor. And I think that's where aspiration and hope, because that's the big thing. And I tell this, you know, to a lot of people. I said the one thing that survivors need more than anything is hope. And I hope other filmmakers think about this when they do difficult stories and subject matters like this, is like, you need your viewers to have hope. You need this survivor to have hope. And that's the one thing that people really need more than anything, because that's what's going to keep them going.
Yeah, I can add one interesting thing we got from someone that made us think a lot. One of the things is we didn't want to make an exploitation film at all. Grummy is a movie about grooming. Like, if you watch it, if you see how the father manipulates his position of authority to take advantage of a kid who trusts him, it's a sacred bond of trust that he abuses. And a lot of people weren't ready for that. And I think it traumatized them more than all these horrible, you know, exploitation movies they've seen with very graphic, you know, violence and different things like this. Sometimes doing something, like she said, more subtle, when you're actually confronting people with something that really happens all the time and that we don't talk about it. But it was interesting because we had one person comment us had seen it, and one of our fears when it was going to be released was like, oh my gosh, are people going to say you guys made a children's movie that is inappropriate? And it was never for kids movie, obviously, but it deals with childhood. And we didn't know if the wrong person would see it and might upset a kid or whatever, but we got a series of interesting messages from different people. Are like, look, I had my kid watch this with me. And one of the most interesting things that we heard was a mother saying that she found this movie incredibly important to her relationship with her child, because when her child was watching at first, she asked her daughter how she felt about the little girl not coming out of the closet. And the daughter said, I think she's bad because you should listen to your parents. And the mom used that as an excuse to teach her about consent. She used it as an excuse to teach her about what kids have to do when adults ask them to do it, how kids have to, you know, respond when they're asked to be touched or physical closeness to a child. And we got that, like, that was probably the best thing I could have ever heard, that this was used to teach a kid about consent.
And then her kid started running around the house with like a fake sword, requoting Violet's words at the end of the film, like as a power, you know, chant. And I was like, that's really amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And but, I feel like kids are not taught about consent. You know what I mean? Like, it's always like, give hugs. And like, it's like, I know it's like the basic thing, like give hugs and like do the thing. And it's just like, kids deserve to be able to, like, they're still people and they're still humans.
They need their own autonomy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But, you know, and I will say, just kind of wrapping up what Micheline was saying, you know, this is not just a female directed film. This is a feminine film. This is a movie that lives. It's not just, okay, well, we finally got a woman to direct something like this. It's her experience. It's her story. Anybody who's ever watched her art over the years and everything she's done, like every bit of Micheline is in this. It's very much pulled directly from her childhood. And to me, this is not just a film directed by a female director. It is a female film.
Yeah.
And that's the way that I see it.
That's awesome. Well, that was all I had for you guys today. Thank you so much for chatting about Grummy, and thank you for being so vulnerable with this movie and with everything. Like, as a survivor, it's like so greatly appreciated, and like you said, it gives hope. So I just
Well, thank you guys for
congratulations.
making space. I can tell you, like, watching Dread just grow and change over the years and become this incredible platform for so many different stories and so many different subject matters. Like, you guys are really doing amazing work, and we're really, really happy to be here today and talking with you guys. And I'm just proud to be, a part of this with you guys, and just keep on kicking butt and telling stories that matter, and making space for everybody. It's really cool. It's really cool to see this finally happening. I'm really happy, and congratulations again on your role as the editor.
Thank you guys so much. Well, thank you everybody for watching. The link for Grummy will be in this post so you guys can watch it. So thank you guys so much again for taking the time to chat.